Hello, I'm Andy Coulson, and welcome back to Crisis What Crisis, the podcast which aims to guide you towards a more resilient approach to life and whatever it might throw at you. We're joined today by Sarah Standing, journalist, toy shop owner and author. On the face of it, Sarah has enjoyed and appreciated a charmed life. The daughter of actress Nanette Newman and director, writer and actor Bryan Forbes, and sister of well-known TV presenter Emma Forbes, Sarah is also married to the brilliant British actor Johnnie Standing. Mum of three, grandmother to two, Sarah is the glue at the centre of a talented, loving family and a network of friends that includes Sir Elton John in its number. All done whilst juggling a life as a successful contributor to national newspapers and magazines, including The Times and The Spectator. But in the space of a few hours on a November day in 2020, Sarah's life changed forever. At 10 a.m. that day, she went to see her GP, complaining of feeling breathless. By 4 p.m, she'd been diagnosed with cancer, more specifically grade 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Sarah's brilliant new book, Dancing with the Red Devil, tells the story of what happened next. It's an account of facing down cancer and chemotherapy during those dark days of COVID. But it's also the most wonderful and, I think, valuable memoir of family, of love, and the power of friendship in crisis. Sarah, as I suspect you will detect in this conversation, is someone who loves to laugh, but who also tells it like it is. Her book is brutal in its honesty, written in real time, moving, at times hilarious, and full of insight that I think is valuable to anyone facing tough times, or for that matter, anyone who's in the orbit of someone dealing with crisis. Sarah Standing, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Sarah, I'm going to start with one of those insights from the book that I absolutely loved. You say at the end of the book, in fact, life should be understood looking backwards, but lived going only forwards and at full throttle. Having gone through such an appalling experience, is that a good summary of the sort of Sarah Standing approach to life?
Totally, and it's very strange because when you're living in it, it seems all-encompassing when you're going through something that's bad, but it's a bit like childbirth. The minute you come out the other side, it does, thankfully, fade into a memory, but it's not an acute memory. And I do truly believe what I've taken out of it is that I always did lead life quite at full throttle, but I just intend to, grow old totally disgracefully. And I genuinely do, because I think getting older is a privilege. It's really taught me that. And anybody who bangs on about, oh my God, I'm about to be 50, I don't know, lucky.
Yeah.
You're lucky.
Yes. Can I ask, how are you now? I know that after writing the book, which ends as you sort of emerge successfully from 6 months of chemo and from the immunotherapy, that a second smaller lymphoma was found. As I understand it, that's been zapped to use
That's been zapped.
Your
I had 4 weeks of radiotherapy, and I got the news after I'd written the epilogue to the book that I've got the all clear, which is just an amazing feeling.
Fantastic.
I mean, endless, checkups for the next 5 years, but I'm genuinely not holding my breath anymore.
Fantastic. Did knowing that you'd written the book, that sort of backward understanding that I mentioned earlier, did that help in the second phase?
Definitely. I found what was quite interesting was I originally wrote the book just for me, not for publication. I just wrote it in real time in order to try and make sense of what was happening to me. Also, it was during lockdown and I was pretty isolated with my husband, and it was, once I'd watched Tiger King or whatever it was and made banana bread.
We all watched Tiger King.
I just thought I'd better get on and do something slightly more productive.
Yeah.
And I found that it was sort of too scary to look forward too much. So I just had these wonderful memory banks came back to me about my childhood. And I found going backwards very comforting, but I've always been a sort of forward-living person, so it's very, very pleasant to get back to that place now.
Yeah. I know you hold to the view that there's this kind of neurological, scientific benefit to nostalgia, but I want to talk about that later because I'm really interested in that. But as I say, congratulations on this book. It doesn't hang about in telling its story. You're diagnosed by page 13.
Yes, exactly.
And we're plunged with you into this at times pretty dark world at a hell of a pace. Tell us, if you don't mind, about that day. About the day that you were diagnosed.
I'd been feeling breathless for about 5 days, and I think I've had antibiotics about 8 times in my life. I've always been blessed with unbelievably good health. And my son dropped my little grandson off to me in my toy shop and said, could I look after him for half an hour because he'd got a flat tire or something. And I realised that it was very hard to carry him. And I had to kind of prop him up in a cardboard box with pillows behind him because he couldn't yet sit up. And so I thought I really ought to go to the doctor. Went to the doctor. Doctor did some kind of tests on me, obviously did a COVID test, negative, gave me some antibiotics, said come back in 3 days' time if it's not better. Went back, still wasn't better. And he thought that I ought to go and see a specialist because maybe I had long COVID. Maybe I'd had COVID, hadn't realised I got COVID. And so I literally just was at work, went to the appointment, had nothing with me except my credit card, thankfully, and my keys. Went and saw this divine doctor who said, I'm going to send you to have a scan and I'm going to send you to have an ultrasound. And went to have a scan, went to have an ultrasound. And when I don't know what you call them, ultrasoundist, I don't know what they're called correctly, but when he started to do the ultrasound, he very casually said to me, oh, who's your oncologist? And I was like, I don't have an oncologist. I've just come here because I'm breathless.
So that was the first sort of
But it didn't actually set off any alarm bells whatsoever. I mean, I must have been sort of, I don't know, it just didn't. And went back to the doctor with the results and he said, oh, you've got a lot of fluid, which is pressing your organs up, which is making you feel breathless. So they drained the fluid, by which time I was admitted. And at 5 o'clock, he came in and just said, you know, you've got cancer. I mean, it was just as... He didn't say it, he said it in a much nicer way, but he also apologised profusely because he had on a visor and gloves and masks, and he said, normally I'd hold your hand when I told you this.
Or kind of prevented any kind of human...
Yeah, any human contact.
Yeah.
I was watching the Trump-Biden election, and he kind of said, do you mind if I turn the television off? And I was like, no, of course not. And at that stage, I kind of disengaged with my body, if you like. It was a very strange... I was actually quite calm. My worst thing was telling my family over the phone because I couldn't, weren't allowed any visitors.
That's going to resonate with so many people, I think. I mean,
that was tough.
A wretched...
Yeah.
A wretched aspect to what was an appalling situation. When you talk about sort of disassociating yourself with the situation, the sort of depersonification of it all, if you like.
Very much so.
If that's the right word. How do you sort of reflect back on that now? Because we talked earlier about how the difficult memories in life sort of fade over time. Is that still really clear in your mind?
Yes, I think what it is, or it is for me, is I think that if you sort of slightly remove yourself from it, it gives one a bit of a coping mechanism. It almost as if it's happening to somebody else. You know it isn't. You know it's happening to you. But if you step away, and that's just a mechanism that I haven't practiced, I don't know why, but I seem to be able to do that.
This is the debate, really, is whether or not that is in us. You know,
Yeah, I think you have to find...
That's a natural kind of
yes,
survival
you
instinct.
have to find something to kind of, there is no option. I mean, that's the thing with often with a crisis, is you can't run away from it. You've got to face it head on. So you really, how you cope with it is how you can get that strength yourself. Yeah. I mean, the one thing I did, which as a journalist you'll understand, is I did say to my oncologist, I'm never going to Google anything about this.
Yes.
Because I knew that would take...
I'm interested in this. So that's a decision you made in the moment?
In the moment, and kept to.
I mean, are there clues to that previously with you? I mean, were you kind of against Dr. Google?
No, I was an appalling Googler.
Were you?
Oh, God, yes. I'd read an article in the Daily Mail about somebody who got some disease I'd never heard of, and I'd be Googling like mad. All over it.
Yeah.
No.
So how interesting, then, that in the moment when it's at its most serious...
Yeah.
You are able to calculate that is not going to be a good thing for me.
That's not going to be a good thing for me. That's going to lead me down a really dark hole. And
it also
I barely heard of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Yeah. It also requires you, though, to put your trust in the doctor's hands, right? Because you're basically saying, over to you, which makes you a great patient.
Well, he said to me, after he told me what was going to happen to me, and I was going to have chemo, and it was going to be a really strong R-CHOP, known as the Red Devil, and I would lose all my hair and blah 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 blah. I kind of said to him, okay, but I've got to tell you a bit about myself. And I said, I've been a journalist for 30 years. I own a toy shop. I've got a husband I adore that I've been married to for nearly 40 years. I've got children who I'm passionate about, a mother that went through a whole list. And I said, but I have decided that I'm not going to Google anything about it because I think it will take me down a very dark hole. And he looked up and he just kind of went, well, in that case, you'll be a great patient and I will make you better. And I believed him.
But the trust thing.
I trusted him. I'd met him half an hour before.
As a journalist, you're also fundamentally curious, sceptical.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just thought, no, my life is in your hands. I will let you do whatever it takes. I totally trust you.
You lost your dad in 2013, Sarah, but your mum's still going.
My mum is still going strong.
And of course, not being able to be with her because of COVID must have been another layer of
awful
sort of agony in
absolutely awful
for you both.
Yeah, absolutely terrible. I saw her twice. She came up to London and literally stood on my doorstep, not coming into the house, for about 10 minutes.
Really?
Yeah. And because if you remember the second lockdown, it was freezing. It was bitter.
Yes.
And my husband was so protective that he'd taped red tape 3 feet away from the front door so that nobody could cross the line. And we'd bought one of those awful patio heaters because one of the things of losing your hair, and God knows you lose every single hair on your body, including the hairs up your nose, the hairs you never even think about.
Yeah.
You cannot retain heat. So no matter how much kind of layers and thermals and God knows what you've got on, you just are bitterly cold.
Yes.
The best present my husband's ever bought me best present my husband's ever bought me was an electric blanket, which literally seemed to save my life.
Yeah.
I became like, kind of bald cashmere beanie, somebody going to bed with kind of 14 layers and bed socks and the electric blanket all the time.
You talk in the book about the guilt you felt after your diagnosis, this idea that you'd somehow let everyone down by becoming ill.
Very much so.
An ice pick to the heart are the words that you use.
It was very difficult because I've always been blessed with fantastic energy, and I've always been able to multitask and kind of be the person that will take the baby for the night if, one of my children is having a hard time, or go down and see my mother and bring soup if she's not very well. And I just found being the needy one as opposed to being needed very difficult. I found it one of the most difficult things to cope with.
How did you cope? Tell me about the sort of commentary.
Well, again, I had no choice, really. I had to just... I was unbelievably blown away by how amazing people were to me. And I just had to accept it graciously, which I did learn to do quite quickly.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the friendship bit in a second, because there are a couple of scenes, particularly in your book, that are worthy of a Richard Curtis film without any shadow of a doubt. The chemo, though, after which your book is named, The Red Devil, as you say, to give it its official title, R Chop, is powerful and painful.
It's not so much pain. It goes in waves.
Impactful, perhaps.
Yes, impactful, exactly. I mean, it was painful at the beginning because it gives you this sort of deep bone ache, which I wasn't expecting. Because modern technology is so amazing. After you've had the chemo, they sort of strap an electronic device onto your arm, which injects you with something every hour or 2 hours. I mean, you can't really feel it, and then a buzzer goes off 24 hours later, and you take this thing off, and it's done its job. But I had terrible, deep bone ache the first time I had chemo. The first time I had chemo, it made me really sick. But after that, I coped with it much better. The thing I hated almost more than the chemo was the steroids I had to take for 5 days after it. They send you kind of loopy.
Yeah. Massive highs.
Massive sleeplessness. I was averaging 3.5 hours sleep a night, which makes the nights very, very long. Yeah.
So how are you managing that? This podcast is all about the lessons for others, wherever we can find them. In that moment, which is a proper moment of crisis.
Yeah.
What are you saying to yourself, Sarah? How are you managing it? Because
I had a big calendar strapped to sellotaped to my kitchen counter, where I would cross off the days until the chemo ended. And I think I just set myself small goals. I was quite disciplined. I made myself walk around the block, twice around the block, every day, which was tough at times because it would make me not so much exhausted, but just think I was going to faint. And
so this is the setting of small goals for yourself?
Yeah, small goals. I cooked dinner every night, no matter what, for my husband and myself. I thought that was important to me. It made me feel like I was, relevant and not just a patient.
Yes.
I would spend an awful lot of time on the phone talking to friends, of which I'm truly blessed.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the whole chemo episode wasn't nearly as bad as what the chemo did to my heart. That's the only time I thought I was going to die.
Yes, I want to talk about that. You touched on it earlier, and you write at times hilariously, if you don't mind me saying so, about your hair loss. But your jokes aside, it was clearly something that you felt very deeply, right? The loss of your hair. And again, something that I suspect will resonate with a lot of people listening and watching this who've ever been, in the same situation, who've been, in and around chemo. It's a sort of loss of identity, I suppose, isn't it? I remember my sister went through this, and it was the first thing she said.
Yeah.
It was straight off the bat.
Yeah.
What about my hair?
Yeah.
And is it about identity? Is that what it was for you?
It's identity. It's your femininity. It's your vanity, and it's also hair is something which if you've got it, you very much take it for granted. You don't, you can expect to put on weight, lose weight, whatever, but what you don't ever expect is to wake up one day with no hair. And most people don't look, unless they, shave their heads because they want to and have a great shaped head. Most people don't look that great with no hair, especially women. I mean, whatever way you cut it. Yeah, that was awful. That was horrible. I can't pretend I didn't hate it. And also, all my life, I'd had long hair, and I'd spent a lot of money nurturing it, taking care of it, and to lose it and to not have that shield.
That's interesting. You use the word shield.
Yeah, it was a shield. And also fiddling with it, putting it up if you were concentrating on something to get it out of your eyes, running your fingers through it. You don't realise how often you touch one's hair.
Yes.
It's almost like a comfort blanket.
Yeah.
Although you never realise it until you don't have it.
It's the exposing nature of
it.
Yeah.
And I did find that one of the most sort of losing it, having it shaved, the last remains of it shaved off. I found it the most kind of submissive act ever.
Yeah.
I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror for about 10 days. I couldn't bear it. It's also incredibly painful when you lose your hair. Your scalp is so tender. But yeah, I mean, I'm very glad I've got it back. Completely different colour, no more highlights, completely different texture, like baby's hair, soft, and I never had a curl on my head before.
Yeah.
But I'm so grateful to have any.
We've touched on it already. The lockdown, the shielding for you and John, not just because of your illness, but because of his age as well. That added another layer of trauma for you. Being separated from your mum and your kids and your friends. The book, as I mentioned earlier, is like a Richard Curtis film in the way that it describes how your friends sort of wrap themselves around you, but from a distance. There are two scenes in particular. One when your daughter pulls up in her new car outside your house and turns the radio on and starts dancing by the side of her car. You come out of the house. Well, you tell the story. You come out of the house.
Oh, my husband bought our daughter a kind of second-hand banger, and she'd gone to pick it up and came during lockdown, came and to show it to us. And she was just, buzzing with happiness. She was 30, so it had taken her a very long time to kind of A, pass her driving test, and B, get a car. And she came out of the car and pumped the radio up and was dancing, pretending to karaoke. And we came out with masks on and God knows what, and were just kind of watching her with complete happiness. And then 3 people walked down the street and they joined in the dancing. And it was a wonderful cinematic moment of just unadulterated joy.
There are people hanging out their windows joining
it was just fabulous. Kids it was just, something to do. I know, something to do during lockdown. And it was just one of those completely joyous moments that you just think, I've got to treasure this one.
And there's another when your friends gather outside of your house as a surprise. You open the door and there's a mass of friends outside all singing Christmas carols for you.
That is just, I can barely talk about that. It makes me cry so much. It was just the most amazing, thoughtful thing to do, because they all knew I'm a massive Christmas fan, and they all knew that Johnnie and I were going to spend Christmas alone together and not really do anything. And I opened the door and there were 30 of my friends and family there, and they'd found carol singers with lanterns and were all singing Christmas carols. And it's so strange, because if you saw that in a movie, you'd have the person who opens the door going, oh my God, this is amazing. But when you are not expecting it, your actual reaction is, I was so confused. My son's dog ran into the house and I was thinking, what's he doing here? And, oh my God, we've got carol singers. We've never had carol singers. This is amazing. And then I suddenly saw, there's my daughter, there's Anya, there's Trisha, and I suddenly realised it was all people I knew. I just burst into tears.
It's a lovely, lovely story, but it goes to something deeper as well, doesn't it? In that when you're in the midst of crisis, the importance of recognising a moment of joy
is massive.
It is, and for what it is, you know,
Yes.
in and of itself,
Yes.
a moment of joy.
Totally.
Regardless of the darkness that's around you.
Totally.
To find those when in crisis is critical. You
Totally
agree?
critical. And I really genuinely think and hope that I've taken that with me out the other side. I think that I talk in the book about how I'd spent a lot of my life, probably like everybody, on a speeding train where you vaguely look out of the window, but everything's a bit of a blur because it's going so fast and you're trying to do this and you're trying to do that and you've got other things on your mind. And I think what it's really taught me is to slow down on that ride, not slow down and do things at a slower pace, but to really appreciate the small moments.
Yes.
And find joy in them. And it's jolly easy to do if you look hard enough. It really is. Or not even if you look hard enough, just if you do appreciate the small things.
Yeah, in good times and...
In good times and in bad times.
Yeah. And there's another line, Sarah, sorry, that you use in the book that I like. Cancer not only makes the person going through it appreciate every nuance of life, it also makes the people who love you speak their minds. So this goes to a different point. You know, that's your advice, I assume, to anyone who finds themselves in the, you know, the orbit, as I put it earlier, the orbit of cancer.
Definitely.
Speak your mind, because that.
Well, when I say speak your mind, if you have a friend who has written something wonderful, who's done something nice, say it. Don't have the thought on the stairs. Tell people how much they mean to you or how much you appreciate something they've done or how great you think they've been during that. Don't hold it back. Don't just spew it out.
The danger, isn't it, that for some people, not all people, but the danger for some people through nervousness or you know, an inability to kind of be able to say what they feel, which, you know, plenty of people have for a whole range of different reasons, is that you end up in this sort of world of platitudes in crisis.
Yes.
I mean, that's
yes, it is
the advice, isn't it, to those who find themselves in those situations?
Yes.
Don't worry about that.
No, I think there's a great danger of there being an elephant in the room if you don't talk about it. I had one of my closest friends, their daughter died in a tragic accident. And she's a very close friend of mine, and she just said to me that she would... We talked about her daughter a lot and still do. Obviously, every time I see her, we talk about her, or I find a photograph which I send her or whatever. And she said, what people don't understand is I would rather talk about her if it makes me cry. That's better than not talking about her.
Yes.
And I found, I mean, I was very lucky in that I would say the majority of my friends were great and didn't say they understood how I felt, because unless they'd had cancer, they didn't. But I also was very surprised that some people said, don't worry, when I told them, don't worry, your secret's safe with me, because it never crossed my mind that it was a secret to have cancer.
Yes.
And I think that conversation is very important, because 1 out of 2 people will get cancer in their lifetime.
Yes.
And I think that the fear that surrounds it is, obviously it's there, obviously it's real, but there is always hope. And medicine and science is improving at such a galloping rate that I think fear has a lot to answer for. I genuinely do. I think that all the nurses said to me, which was quite interesting, that people who had an optimistic attitude did much better than those who didn't.
And that's not sort of, you know, power of positive thinking.
No.
Kind of, you know,
that's just
nonsense. It's just the truth that you're...
Yes, and I saw some people, you know, when I'd go in to have treatment, some people were, because they couldn't have anybody with them, were crying because they didn't think they could go through it on their own and were really desperately upset. I actually found going through the treatment alone helpful in a strange way, because I was only having to manage my emotions and not other people's emotions.
Yeah. You could focus purely on
Just
what was-
focus. And also, I have to say that the nurses, all of them, went the distance because, you know, incredibly overworked, overstretched. They knew that everybody was doing it alone, and they really were amazing.
Yeah, yeah. It's the tiny things in those
It's the
moments as well,
smallest
isn't it?
things.
You mentioned, you know, being brought a cup of tea, but it's in a mug, it's not in a paper
Yes.
cup.
It's the
It's a
smallest
tiny,
things. It's a
tiny
neighbour
thing,
leaving
but-
me a bunch of daffodils that she says she's hidden behind a dustbin just because she saw them and thought that they were, you know, would cheer me up. It is the small things.
Yes, yes. You're a journalist, a writer. You have strong views about the words we should use,
Very strong.
particularly in the context of crisis, here the context of cancer. The language of crisis is something that we're very interested in this pod, on this pod. The word journey is a pet hate that we share.
I know. That's,
It's massively overused. I blame Simon Cowell.
I know,
X
I'm
Factor,
fascinated
which is-
by that,
Which is
yeah.
where it all started, as far as I'm concerned, showing people their best bits and describing it as a journey before they're booted off back into obscurity. Why do you hate it so much?
because to me, a journey is to do with travel, or from getting from A to B. And 9 times out of 10, it's something enjoyable that you look forward to. A crisis journey is just the wrong word for it. A crisis is a roller coaster, not a journey. And I literally go mad when I scroll through Instagram and people have been on a journey, which involves nothing particular. It's just the wrong use of the word. They've been through an experience, but it's not a journey.
Yes.
I want journeys to India, to the south of France. I want lovely journeys on aeroplanes.
Fight and battle, 2 other words.
Loathe it, because I think that both of them imply if you don't try hard enough, you're a loser. And anybody that's going or has gone through cancer has done their very best.
Yeah.
I really feel strongly about that.
Yeah.
You've got to fight it. You know, you've got to fight it. What do you think I'm doing? I'm not lying back and just saying, take me, you know.
Yes.
Take
So
me
as
down.
we read in newspapers that we've both
Yes.
written for, you know, they lost their battle against cancer.
Yes.
That's that's the wrong characterisation.
Yes,
from you.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I really feel very strongly about it. I think it's a very undermining word. Everybody has fought that's been touched by cancer with every grain they've got left in them
Yes.
to turn back the clock. And it just strikes me as something that, as I say, is very undermining.
There's another dimension to your friendships, Sarah, that you write about. When you're diagnosed, 2 of your close friends are also dealing with cancer.
Yeah.
And one, Mill,
Yeah.
who you write about very movingly, sadly dies. So you're dealing with grief whilst dealing with cancer. I suppose that the straightforward question is how did you manage it? How did you cope?
I was devastated by Mill's death, and she was so brave. She really was. She didn't battle and she didn't fight. She was just bloody brave. And she had 2 children, young children. And we used to talk to one another through the night when we'd FaceTime one another with steroids and make one another laugh. I don't know. That's a very tricky question. I never stopped thinking about her.
Were you able to separate the 2 things? You're losing a friend whilst dealing with, an
Yes.
existential threat to
Yes.
your own life. Did you separate
I felt
them?
quite. I didn't feel guilty that I was okay. We had completely different cancers and different circumstances and different medicines and God knows what. I just felt that I really had to kind of put my big girl pants on and just not whinge about anything to do with myself. I actually thought it was great. Mel always used to say to me, you know, you've got this. And I just know she'd have wanted me to have got it. So I was determined to get it, or rather not get it. I was even more determined to get better.
Yeah. Another layer of crisis comes for you when, you alluded to it earlier, when a complication leads to you being rushed to hospital, where the words, "We're just going to stop your heart for 10 seconds."
was bad.
Uttered by a doctor. Just explain what had happened.
What had happened, and I have to just put out here, I am so bad on medical terminology. What had happened was my pulse rate, which had been pretty steady, 85, and I used to take it every morning to make sure that it was. I had one of those things at home to do it. It went up to 220. And at first, I thought...
From a usual resting heart rate of
85. But you could see it. It was sort of making its presence known.
Yeah.
It was visible, my pumping heart. And it was about 5:30 in the morning, and I was the only one awake. And I thought, oh, you know, the reading's wrong. I'll have a bath and a cup of tea and it'll be fine. And it rose again to 225. And I thought, well, I'll just call the chemo ward and check that this is okay. And they said, how quickly can you get to the hospital? And I said, well, probably in about 7 minutes if there's not much traffic. And they said, okay, if it takes longer, you need to call an ambulance immediately. So I began to think that maybe it wasn't, you know, it was a little bit serious. And I arrived at the hospital and they were all waiting for me and taking blood from my port, taking blood from this arm, taking blood from that arm, putting ECG, which they couldn't get a reading from because it was jumping around so much. And then I went up to the cardiology ward and they were trying all these quite strange cures for it, one of which involves doing a deep jugular massage, which actually feels like you're being strangled to try and jolt it out of the rhythm. That didn't work. And then they came in and wanted me to bear down like you do when you're giving birth. That didn't work. And then they said, I'm afraid we're just going to have to stop your heart, but it's absolutely fine. It will only be...
terrifying moment. I mean...
It was awful. And I was in a very small room and suddenly there were sort of 6 doctors and nurses lined up against the wall, snapping on blue gloves. And it all happened so fast that I didn't have I actually thought, and this is where being a journalist is sometimes makes you into a bit of a sick puppy. I kind of thought, okay, well, now I'm going to be able to see whether a white light appears or, you know, angels or anything happens.
You were curious.
I was curious. I was like, okay, but you've got to talk to me the whole time. I was absolutely adamant. I said, you've got to keep talking to me. And they did keep talking to me, and they told me that I would feel a sort of heat and a weight on my chest, and then they would bring me back they would give me another injection, which would make it hopefully go back into the same rhythm. And it was over very quickly, and it did.
But you went through that process a number of times.
I did go through that process a number of times, and then eventually I had
You've had your heart stopped how many times, Sarah, do you think?
2 or 3.
2 or 3, yeah.
Yeah.
It's an anecdote.
It's a good anecdote. And then I had to have a operation to correct it, which was tiny. And I'd never even had an anaesthetic before any of this happened. The first anaesthetic I had, which I was terrified of. That's one thing I was terrified of, was having an anaesthetic, was when I had to have a port-fitted, portacath or whatever they're called, where they put the chemo and stuff. And I was scared about that, but it was fine. I mean, typical. I kind of had the operation, and opened my eyes and looked at the clock and said to one of the nurses, when are they going to operate on me? They were like, we already have. I was like, oh, okay, so everything everybody told me is true. I won't remember a thing.
You write in the book about the relationship between fond memories and the areas of our brains that perceive and register pain. This idea that nostalgia and our, I think you call it autobiographical memory, can act as a painkiller.
Yeah, I think it can.
You subscribe to that idea? Yeah?
I do subscribe to that idea. And it's something subconsciously I've thought for a very long time, because when I can't get to sleep, I'm a bit of an insomniac. I make myself walk through the house that I grew up in as a child. And that's a very happy memory.
You did before.
I did that before.
Right.
And I...
Through the back door?
Through the back door, through every room, upstairs, downstairs, through the garden. And it's a very happy memory. I do the same. Love Christmas. I do the same with Christmases and things like that, remembering. And I've got a very weird... I can remember what people cooked a year ago, which is so vaguely pointless, but gives me great pleasure. And yes, I think...
Not just pleasure, it's useful.
It's very useful.
Yeah.
Also, I can sort of eat something in a restaurant and think, oh, I could cook that. I can remember the taste, the smells, what they've used in it. So yes, I do think it does. It's in the same way that you smell something from your childhood and it takes you back.
Yes.
I mean, I'm very fortunate in that I had a very happy childhood. I also recognise that might not work for some people who have had a traumatic childhood. It can have the reverse effect.
Yeah.
But
let's just give a little bit of context here, because it was a wonderful upbringing. Parents who clearly adored you and your sister Emma. A strong, stable family, despite the showbiz environment.
Very stable.
Visits to your dad's film sets, Hollywood, famous faces at Sunday lunch, I'm sure, all that stuff. Do you think then that drawing not just the sort of nostalgic sense of it, but the actual memories of that childhood, when crisis came knocking for you, they'd given you a sort of an inbuilt sense of resilience?
Well, they were very safe places to go back to. They were very safe, enjoyable places to go back to and to remember those things. And I didn't walk around with those memories with such clarity, strangely, until I got cancer. And then they sort of flooded my brain. But yes, I was incredibly fortunate. And I do know how fortunate I was and am to have had such a happy, secure childhood. When I first was going out with my husband, who's 25 years older than me, I was 24, desperate to get married, have loads of children. Initially, I wanted 8. I ended up with 3, which is perfect. He would just kind of go, I never want to get married again. And I go, why? And he got 7 divorces in his immediate family. And his take on it, what if it goes wrong? And I was like, what if it goes right? Why would it go wrong? I'd got nothing in my DNA to ever show me anything but 2 parents who simply adored one another, which he found incredulous. And now, obviously, as I'm not 24, I realise was fairly, I'm exceptionally lucky to have had that. But his take was, what if it goes wrong? And I just didn't come from that. I found his attitude unbelievable.
Yes. But the lesson here is, even if your childhood and your upbringing and your past is untroubled, or is more troubled and more difficult, go and try and find those moments. Go and try and find that room.
Totally.
Where there was happiness and stability, even frankly, if it was temporary.
Totally.
Because that process you found, just as a mental exercise, you found that.
I found it the biggest
helpful.
comfort.
Yeah.
I really did. I genuinely did. I found it amazing.
Let's talk a little bit more about Johnny. It'll be easier, I think, for our listeners and viewers to find a film or TV show that he hasn't been in.
He's been in an awful lot. He's just finished doing a film with Michael Caine, actually, and Glenda
fabulous.
Jackson.
Fabulous. A very, very long and distinguished career on stage and screen. Your love story is an unusual one, Sarah, because you first met when you were 5 years old.
We did.
And he must
have been 35
and married.
And
came to visit your house.
Came to visit my house because we were living in Hollywood because my father was directing his first big Hollywood film called King Rat, and Johnny was in it. Yes, and he came over for dinner one night at my parents' house with George Segal and James Fox, who were also in the film, and Denham Elliott. And in this house, I had in my bedroom, spoiled brat, obviously, a colour television, which was quite normal in America, but not very normal in England at that time. Johnny was so impressed that I had a colour television and wanted to watch the results of some baseball match or something. So he came and sat on the edge of the bed and watched 10 minutes of the baseball, which meant that I got to stay up for an extra 10 minutes. So I immediately thought he was just fabulous because he'd extended my bedtime.
You don't meet again. Actually, I don't think that's true. I think he
we did meet because he obviously kept in touch with my dad. We did meet again off and on, but not really. He came to my 21st birthday party, but more as a friend of my parents.
Yes, yes. And then not long after that.
You're
single.
I'm single, broken-hearted, miserable, broken up with a boyfriend, and I'd been given 2 tickets to go to the premiere of Fame, and I was kind of on the phone to my dad going, I don't have anybody to go with, I'm a sad loser. And he said, I bumped into Johnnie Standing the other day. He's on his own. Why don't you call up and invite him? And I was like, I can't. I mean, he's, so much older than me, and he won't remember who I am. And my dad said, no, he's so funny and he's so sweet. I'm sure he'd love to take you. So I did ring him up and woke him up because he's a theatre actor. And as he says, the one point of being in the theatre is you get to sleep late in the morning. And I'm such an early bird. And I woke him up and he sounded like he was half dead. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I've woken you up. And eventually he called me back and took me to the premiere of Fame. And we had the most wonderful time and have basically been together ever since.
3 children, 2 grandchildren.
Yeah.
Can I ask, how did the diagnosis impact your relationship? You described lockdown, never mind cancer, as the antichrist of marriage.
Oh, it was
Which
tough.
sounds harsh,
no,
but presumably fair.
It was.
I don't know.
It was awful. I mean, it was really. I think it was just terrible for Johnny. I think because I was very glib about it, and I think they had to carry the burden of it much more than me, both my husband and my kids. Yeah. And obviously, they didn't put the Google restrictions on themselves.
Yes.
Nor did they meet my doctors because it was impossible to. So, I mean,
they're caught in a horrible kind of
awful.
no
and I'm
man's
sure
land
they were all talking to one another, and I think I feel very selfish about that. Actually, I don't think I really realised how awful it was for them because I made such an effort to keep it bright and breezy, thinking I was helping them.
Yes.
But I think if we'd been together, and if we'd been together as a family, I think we'd have talked about it. But it was hard to do over the phone to have those kind of conversations.
Yes.
Your
view. I mean, obviously, you didn't have a choice because of COVID. But your view is that families who find themselves in that situation, your view presumably is you should share everything. You should talk about everything. Are you? I
don't know. That's a tricky question. I certainly wouldn't have wanted to know if a doctor or an oncologist had said to me, "You've got 6 months to live, put your life in order," I wouldn't have wanted to have known that. Just because I think it would...
wanted your family to know that. I guess what I'm saying is that COVID may have brought an advantage for you, because it kind of...
And it also made me, just from a selfish level, it made me very safe in terms of my health, because when you have chemo and your immune system is taken down to nothing, a cold can, quickly turn to something else, or you have to be so careful in general when you're having chemo not to catch things if you possibly can. And I was saved I was saved from that because I was in a bubble.
Yes. Let's finish with some Sarah Standing crisis management advice.
Okay.
Written in real time as you're dealing with chemo. You write, "If I'm having a high energy day, I exploit it. If I'm having a low ebb day, I give in and go to bed, and I feel no guilt, but I don't give cancer the oxygen it wants. I try not to let it bully me." Now, that's a strategy, I think, that applies to whatever crisis you might be facing. Would you agree?
Yes, I would. I think that any crisis that you're going through has the ability to take you hostage if you allow it to. And I think that gives an advantage. And
giving in on a day is not the same as giving up, right?
No, very different. Very different.
Another strategy you have, Sarah, it strikes me, is to, as you put it, avoid unhappiness. And it reminded me of the TV show, I don't know if you've seen it, Marvellous, that's based on the life of a guy called Neil Baldwin. It's played by Toby Jones, I think. And in that, he says, "I always wanted to be happy, so I decided to be." You strike me as someone who's made a very conscious decision.
Very conscious. I've always been a glass half full.
That's optimism. That's not
okay.
not the
Optimism.
Same as happiness,
no, I've always been. I have to say, I've always been a pretty happy person. I really have.
But consciously happy. I mean, it's not as a
I guess
because it is a decision, right?
Yes, I think it is. But I also think it's that. I think it's a lot to do with the way I was brought up, and that a lot to do with, just don't be a moaning Minnie. Just kind of look at the good things in your life.
Which can, on the face of it, it's quite unfashionable, the whole stiff upper lip and look for the positives and all that, but
it can be
it means something.
It can sort of be, yes,
and
it can sort of be innate if you, my parents had brought both my sister and I up to be able to go up market and down market with the same enjoyment from both. So to eat fish and chips or McDonald's, or to eat somewhere really lovely, because that sort of is the life of an actor or a director. It's feast or famine.
Yes.
So I've never wished for something that was unobtainable at the time. I guess I've always approached every day as a sort of new start. Yesterday may have been tough, today's going to be better.
Yeah. And these experiences, these days, long days, difficult days, have made you happier?
Much happier. I mean, I was always happy, but they've made me just much more appreciative.
Fantastic. Before you go, we're going to ask you for your crisis cures, as we do with every guest. This is 3 things that you sort of lean on, rely on, look to in the dark moments. Can't be another person, I'm afraid.
Okay.
What would you say?
I would say that the thing that I always turn to when my life's a bit unsettled or uncertain is cooking. I love cooking. I find cooking unbelievably therapeutic and relaxing and pointful. I like cooking for people. I like cooking for myself. And
give me a specific dish that evokes happiness for you.
Chicken pot pie.
Yeah.
Mashed potatoes.
Yeah. Comfort
peas.
food.
Comfort food.
Lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, I always cook, and I cooked throughout me being ill. I would kind of come upstairs and cook dinner every night.
Yeah.
It just gave me, it centered me.
There must have been days when that was the last thing you wanted.
But the alternative is my darling husband. My darling husband can really only cook eggs, and it takes him so long. And I realised that if I handed over the cooking to him, I would be in hospital with another complaint because I would just be constipated.
So it was partly
self-survival.
Partly happiness, partly survival.
Yes, partly survival.
Okay. Your second cure?
ABBA. ABBA, you can't be unhappy listening to ABBA.
Fabulous. You've only allowed one track. We're going to get all Desert Island Discs now. Which ABBA song would it be?
God, it's so hard. I just love them so much. Mamma Mia. My sister threw this amazing 60th birthday party for me, ABBA themed.
Yes.
And as a massive surprise, she got the cast from the ABBA show to come.
Oh my goodness.
And sing.
Wow.
And I think I'd had one or two too many tequilas and got up on stage. I cannot sing and I cannot dance, but I did for 2 hours with them. And there is video evidence which could be held against me, but I've never, ever just felt such unbridled joy.
Fantastic.
So
your third cure?
My third cure, jigsaws. Very mundane. I think they're a wonderful way of sitting around the kitchen table and everybody is able to talk to one another without actually looking necessarily at one. It's a sort of mindless thing, and you find yourself talking. It requires quite big concentration.
Yes.
I'm a bit of a jigsaw whore. I really like the wooden ones, which are unbelievably expensive, but I have friends that we trade them. And yeah, I find jigsaws very, very therapeutic.
Fantastic. Very specific, very useful crisis cures. Thank
you.
Are
they?
They are. Perfect. Sarah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
And for sharing your story. And on behalf of everyone listening and watching, stay well.
Thank you.
And write more.
I thought for one moment you were going to say sharing my journey. You resisted.
I resisted.
You resisted, yeah. Almost came out.
Almost came out. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much indeed. Pleasure.